Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. As I say to you every week, Ben, welcome back to you as well.
Mate, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. Love this time of the week.
Hey, we got no banter. Like, what are we're just going to hang it on each other on something? We've got no footy to banter about.
We did miss an important sporting event when we did acknowledge obviously all of the Victorian victories in the major codes, but Bryce, we forgot the Vixens in the netball. So I tell you what, you need to shut our state down a bit more often. We win everything. So congratulations to the Vixens for winning the Super Netball. That was a good result. And then obviously you had State of Origin last night, and the Maroons, they are good. They can never lay down.
We do have that little allegiance to Queensland, don't we? Maybe it's because us Victorians just envy the sun. We just want some of that thing they call the sun.
So State of Origin last night, yes, the Maroons got up.
There you go. So there you go, folks. To all those folks who just skip past the footy banter, good news for you.
We're
not
coming into the
back.
summer season, we don't
come back until February. So take a deep breath. Hey, Ben, just before we've got a very special guest today, so you absolutely should stick around for today's episode. It's going to be a corker. But Ben, just wanted to do a little shout out to the community. I want to shout out to. This is not to you, Ben, because I know that you're not an Instagram fella, but I'm calling out to our Instagram crew. If you're listening to this on your mobile, we're experimenting with some new content, because we obviously provide content through audio, Ben, but we also want to provide some additional content through our social platforms. Right. So if you go over to Insta and check it out, we've got the 5 steps to property investing there. And I want you to go and let us know, like it if you're there, but also follow us when you get there, because we are super close to 10,000, Ben, and we want to sort of keep in touch with our couch community over there on the Instagram. We talk to our folks on Facebook too, for those who love Facebook, for those who love LinkedIn, we're over there, for Twitter, all that sort of stuff, YouTube, we're there as well. But for just a little shout out to the Instagram crew. Go over and check out. Let us know what you think about the little carousel we got there on the 5 steps to property investing. And while you're there, if you could follow and help us get over 10K, that'd be pretty cool. And I've also got another announcement, Ben, the new podcast, The Armchair Guide to Property Investing, that you and I did. It's just a 11 episode season. That just went up to number 1, Ben. Number 1. Just a cheeky little number 1 on the desktop that Stiggy saw. And then I was checking it on the mobile. It went to number 2 there as well. So we're pretty excited about that. So we're super grateful for our couch community who support us with the information that we provide on our mission to help people transform their financial futures, Ben. So
it's an important message. If you want the book, that's a nice overview, but the book's goes a little bit deeper again, right? So that's all there for you. It was
backstories. We went over to Facebook. We took the audio. Stiggy popped it up on the podcast. You can just binge listen to us with the backstory on each chapter. So why we wrote it, why it's important, and then for those who want to play along at home, there is a way to get the book, which is really simple. Armchairguide.com.au. So check that out, folks.
There's some episodes on there, but we've never talked about the strategies in detail on the Property Couch, but obviously we give a little sneak peek on the Armchair Guide season and series. So there you go.
Go and check that out, folks. And also, we've got a course launch coming up, our Start and Build course, Ben. We did that once earlier. We got a launch of our Start and Build course coming up, Ben. We've done it once earlier in the year, and some folks have put their hand up to say, hey, listen, we're interested in finding out some more about that. So we're going to do another launch of that Start and Build course, and obviously give it at a price that is at a discount, which will be great. So we are giving away, just to build some momentum towards that launch, which is coming up next week. Ben, I should have had the date. in my mind. It is next Monday, the 16th. Next Monday, the 16th, we'll be launching that. So stick around for that. If we've got your email address, we'll certainly let you know. If we don't, go to thepropertycouch.com.au, download the Make Money Simple Again book, which is on the homepage. We'll have your email address. We'll notify you, Ben. But what we're doing is we're giving some away. We ask people to go and give us a review. So I'm just going to read a few out. This one is from Georgie's Life, Ben. The subject was episode 310. My first episode, I enjoyed the straightforward talking that is current to our way of life now. Property is future investment for yourself, the community, and our country. Just past a year into my first investment property and ready to download and listen to the episodes from this life. Please reach out to us. We're going to give you a free copy of the Start and Build course over 12 hours of teaching. We're going to walk you through that. The next one, Ben, is from Melvin Chung. A free university standard education. Wow, I've now listened to approximately 150 of the 300-something episodes, and I can already say I've learned so much. Hearing the same fundamental principles repeated in multiple scenarios has given me the confidence to finally take the leap into the property market. And then goes on. So there's a little bit more sort of here where it says, I truly believed I would never own my own home in my dream suburb. However, you've given me the confidence to make a start, acquire a property that is within my budget, even if it's in a different state. Keep up the great work. So Melvin, please reach out to us. We're going to give you a free copy of the Start and Build course. This one here is from CARINV. What's that, Ben? Karen V or Karin?
Maybe. Karin V, yep.
Rich content delivered in an easy to understand way. Thanks, Bryce, Ben, Stig, and Emma for all your time and hard work in putting out this podcast. You are so generous in sharing your knowledge for free. We greatly appreciate it. So we appreciate you for listening to Karen V or Karen. We're going to give you a copy in the last one. This is from Pop Lop Game. Ben, I like the creativity of some of these names. An eye-opener is the title. Having binge listening for your podcast for the last couple of months, as I only discovered you since COVID, we have existing properties and you have opened our eyes on how we should structure our loans and start correcting the misinformation we have been given over the years. 5 stars for Ben, Bryce, and Ibis. So there you go, folks. Reach out to us. We will send you the link so you can get free access to that course and keep sending them in, which is going to be very, very exciting. Hey, Ben. Mindset Minute today, as you know, for anyone who has joined us in the last couple of episodes, how to win friends and influence people. I've actually got up to about chapter 15. So I've been doing this for 15 weeks, Ben. Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thought it?
But today I am going to review chapter 15, which is the safety valve in handling complaints. And there is just so much gold in this. So listen to this. Most people trying to win others to their way of thinking do too much talking themselves. Let the other people talk themselves out. They know more about their business and problems than you do. So ask them questions. Let them tell you a few things. If you disagree with them, you may be tempted to interrupt, but don't do it. It is dangerous. They won't pay attention to you and here's an important part, they won't pay attention to you while they still have a lot of ideas of their own crying for expression. So listen patiently and with an open mind. Be sincere about it. Encourage them to express their ideas fully. Even our friends would much rather talk to us about their achievements than listen to us boast about ours. Now, this one is a tough name to pronounce, but La Rochefoucauld, the French philosopher, said, if you want enemies, excel your friends. But if you want friends, let your friends excel you. Why is that true? Because when our friends excel us, they feel important. Oh, we circle back to one of the previous chapters there, man. They feel important, but when we excel them, they, or at least some of them, will feel inferior and envious. So principle number 15, let the other person do a great deal of the talking. There you go. What do you reckon about that? The safety valve in handling complaints.
I could learn a few lessons from that, Bryce.
I was thinking about the old Collingwood. Who cares about Collingwood, Ben? Let us just talk about poor old Freo, who never gets any headlines. So, but no, hopefully that's been of benefit to some folks as they go about their week before I get to next week's. And I've already pre-prepared next week's, Ben, and it's a good one too. So stick around for that.
Can't wait.
Ben, we purposely designed the property couch with an extra seat. It wasn't a two-seat couch. It was three or more people. And today that has come into fruition because we have reserved a spot on the couch for a very special guest. And it is going to be very exciting. Amanda Farmer, we're chatting to all things Strata Property, Ben, which is super exciting. So we had a little chat with Amanda a little earlier. So let's cut to the chat we had with her about Strata Properties. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today on the podcast. We are chatting with Amanda Farmer, who is a specialist strata lawyer with over 16 years of experience in strata and community living. As a fellow and council member of the Australian College of Strata Lawyers, she is a recognised strata expert. Welcome to the Property Couch, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Bryce and Ben. It is great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Hey, we're excited to chat with you today for a couple of reasons. One, Australia was built typically on the quarter-acre block with a house surrounded by a garden with a hills hoist and a barbecue. But looking into the future, it's going to be very, very different. So I think that media is something that we will accept as a new norm going forward. So your expertise in that matter is going to be very exciting to delve into today. But you're also a podcast host yourself. With your own podcast on these particular matters. So I think we're in for a real treat today. But can you take us back to the beginning, because you're now an expert, you're now a specialist, but that wasn't always the way. Take us right back to the beginning and let us sort of know what the professional journey has been for you to get where you are now. Where did it all start?
Oh, wow. The professional journey doesn't feel like a professional journey until maybe you look back. We can paint it that way. Let's do that. Let's go back to the womb. I came out of the womb wanting to be a lawyer. I'm one of those weird people who loves being a lawyer. I don't do it because it sounded like a good idea or I thought the pay packet might be good. I was fascinated by the law and what lawyers did as a kid. No one in my family was a lawyer. My parents were business owners though. So now when I look back, I can see where I got that from. I have always been a curious person. I have loved learning, and the idea of practicing as a lawyer and being able to step into your client's shoes, whatever they were. So if you're a business owner, if you've got a trucking business, then it's my job, if I'm helping you, to understand everything about trucking. And the same applies to any area of the law, really. If you're going to be a good lawyer, then you have to live and breathe what your client does. And I didn't want to get up every morning doing the same thing. So I thought that sounded like a pretty good gig, constantly learning. I started my experience with Strata, actually started as a Strata manager's assistant. So I was about 18 years old. It was my first office job. I had actually started studying law and I was looking for a part-time job. And a friend of mine who later became a mentor and still is, introduced me to his wife, who was a Strata manager. It was the first time I'd heard this word, strata. What in the world is that? Apartments. We're talking about apartment buildings, whether high-rise, low-rise, townhouses are strata as well. And she was a manager dealing with the day-to-day property management of these buildings, working with committees, with owners' corporations. And I worked for her for a year. That was my first exposure to the ins and outs of strata. And then I went and became a law student. Worked as a law student at a legal firm, and we always did a little bit of strata work, and I found it quite fascinating. These are people's lives, their investments as well, incredibly emotional situations, but then very complex from a legal perspective. We're talking about levies and unpaid levies, so we're suing people in court for debts. We're looking at contracts. We're deciding whether somebody can or should do a renovation in their property or keep a pet. We're looking at building defects and developers, building managers, caretakers. So sounds niche, but quite broad. And then when I started my own practice 7 years ago, I decided that I would be a specialist strata lawyer because I really loved that work so much. There's so much of it. It's ever changing and challenging. And even now, after all these years, I still get questions. There's still situations coming up that I have never heard of before. I think, oh, that's new. And it just reminds me why I do what I do.
So Amanda, we probably need to unpack the 101 of what is strata body corporate law and and certainly probably starting from the different titles. So can you just give us an overview of how you would define what is strata and body corporate rulings and regulations?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about shared property here, shared space, if you like. And I say space because technically when you own a strata property, you're owning airspace, you're not owning land. And you'll hear strata lawyers talk about airspace and cubic space and stratum subdivisions. It's all a different way of subdividing land and clever way that developers have come up with to essentially sell you air. And you as a strata property owner, you own an apartment, let's call it for ease, you own that airspace that's within your apartment. So we say you scratch the surface of the paint, you scratch the surface of the ceiling or the floor, you are then outside of your apartment and into the common property. So we're made up of lots, apartments, and common property. And the common property is the stuff that you see around the building, the foyer, the stairwells, the lifts, could be the gym, the pool, the front garden, back garden, basement parking. That's all common property. And there's a whole raft of rules and laws and regulations about how you manage that common property. And that's where we find there's a lot of confusion, a lot of disputes, and a lot of work for strata lawyers.
I was about to say that's where your living comes into play around common property. What people often don't realise, because it's pretty easy to understand a driveway or a common walkway or a pool as common property, but the fact that the walls, the building being in most cases common property, that's probably the hardest thing for people to get their head around, isn't it? Because you set that up beautifully by saying you're buying airspace, you're buying a lot. And then you've also got so you set it up beautifully. But for people to understand, yep, you've moved into, call it 1 of 5 units, or you used apartments. What about 1 of 5 units in those old 70s style villas? You walk through the front door, and that wall you just walk past actually isn't technically yours. You just got the exclusive use of it, right? So does that come up a lot for you, that for people to get their head around the fact that that's not theirs?
Yes, absolutely. Often people who are new to strata, they might be downsizers. So they could be people very experienced in property. They've owned property all their life. They're experienced investors. They've done a lot of renovations. They'll tell me, Amanda, I've renovated plenty of properties and sold a lot, made a lot of money, but now I've bought this apartment. And somebody has told me that I can't go in and rip out the bathroom whenever I like. I have to seek approval. I have to wait for a meeting to be called. And they're not planning, Amanda, they're not planning to call a meeting for 3 or 4 months. And I need to make my money and flip this joint. What's going on here? And I say, welcome. Well, sit down. How can I help?
So that's a great segue into who actually controls, who sets the rules when it comes to strata and body corporates.
Yeah, so in New South Wales, we call the entity that manages the common property, we call it the Owners Corporation. And I say in New South Wales because we have different laws in each of our states, which makes it even more complicated for people managing and advising on these properties. In Queensland, we call it the Body Corporate. In Victoria, we also call it the Owners Corporation. In Western Australia, we call it the Strata Company. So this is the entity that is created when the strata plan is registered by the developer. And every single owner in a building is a member of the Owners Corporation. So you can think of it like a company, you're like a shareholder in a company. And that is the entity that you have to go to seek approval for major things like major renovations, bathrooms, anything that's affecting the structural integrity of the building, changing the external appearance. That's the entity that decides at a meeting what the levies should be, whether we should put solar panels in, whether we should do a big balcony upgrade project. We then have the smaller group, which you might think of like a board of directors. And in New South Wales, we call this the Strata Committee. Could also be called the Executive Committee or the Council of Owners. And this is the group that's elected by all of the owners at the annual general meeting to be that small representative group who deals with the day-to-day. So they communicate with the strata manager, they have their own committee meetings, and they're the ones who decide if a plumber's got to be called up to fix the burst pipe, how that happens, if an insurance claim has got to be lodged. They're dealing with the day-to-day management issues. And these people are volunteers. These are people may have no experience at all. They could be managing multi-million dollars worth of property here. Let's bear that in mind. And it's a big job. So that's the committee and the owners corporation.
Amanda, when I've been dealing with buyers, they almost have this, and so they're trying to get their head around, strata or owners corp or body corp, as you say, the different definitions. They almost have this mentality of if you were to stand at the bottom of a building in New York and sort of just look straight up and see this gargantuan, that feeling of this big corporation, quite often people have that in the back of their mind, that the body corporate is this big, untouchable entity that. But when you break it down, it's actually just you. You are the body corporate. You are one of 3, 5, 100, 1,000, but you are the body corporate, and you have an opportunity to be on that committee if you want to and have a voice. And so it's really not someone with a big stick saying, this is what you need to do. It's actually just a collection of voices where you're trying to organise different agendas in an organised way so that people can try and live together harmoniously, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that is something that I recommend to my clients when they come to me and say, Amanda, this isn't going right in my building. I've got this particular problem. I can't get this approval to do what I want to do. And the first question I ask is, say, are you on the committee? Oh, no, I'm not on the committee. I don't have time for that. No, why would I want to be involved in that? I said, well, you want to get something. Sometimes you got to give something.
Because Mrs. Jones in Unit 1 is on the committee and she often gets what she wants. So, yes, or,
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Sadly, that does happen. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Amanda, there is, in New South Wales particularly, but also parts of Victoria where some of these properties are a little older, we not only have strata title, but we also have stratum and or company titles. Can you just give us a brief definition of those 3 types of titles and why are they different to, say, a Torrens title?
Yeah, so we have company title in various parts of New South Wales as well. I'm familiar with that setup. And this was before the strata title legislation started in the 1960s. Before that, the only way of setting up these apartments in a way that everybody could contribute their share and you could separately sell these parcels was to establish a company. And what you would do is actually sell the shares in the company. You wouldn't be selling land, and you wouldn't be even selling this concept of airspace. That didn't come along until the strata legislation. You'd be selling shares in the company, and the shares give you the right to occupy and use a particular area of the property. So that is still around here in New South Wales. What we do see a lot of, actually, and a bit of work for strata lawyers in this area, is converting from company title to strata title. And a lot of people ask me, how do we do that? The bank sees that as more valuable. We feel that it would increase the value of our investment. And I always say the first thing to do is go and talk to your local council, because that's essentially the reason why some even new buildings are still structured under that company title, because the local council has rules about land size for strata title subdivisions. So they have to still develop as company title. So if anyone has that bright idea, definitely go and talk to the local council about that. In terms of stratum subdivisions, where I see that in New South Wales is where you may have mixed uses for a single building. So you have a commercial use, maybe retail down the bottom, and then residential up the top. And some of the older buildings that I've worked with have had big problems where that is all one strata scheme, because where it's all one strata scheme, you have one set of bylaws, you have one owners corporation, one committee making decisions, and of course the commercial owners have a different interest to the residential owners. So we've gotten a little bit more clever with our developments and with our legislation to have these separate strata schemes, which we call stratum subdivisions, and they are then separately run, but they share some facilities, air conditioning, ventilation systems. They might share a car park. They may share a building manager or a strata manager. And we have separate legal documents. In New South Wales, we call them strata management statements or building management statements that then govern how those 2 buildings operate together.
Mm-hmm. So I guess whenever someone comes up against a company title, though, like the banks don't like it, and therefore the buyers don't like it. So that does affect value. I've come across that a number of times in my own life. So I think the important thing here and what you're saying is There's clearly some understanding to do, but be very clear that a company title, like I'll give you an example. There was a company title property in Lower North Shore. I'm trying to think. I think it was Mossman, Art Deco. That was company title.
Yep.
When one around the corner was Strata, right? So at face value, they don't look any different. And so we were dealing with the agent, and we couldn't work out why this one had a lower quote range and a lower acceptable price to the vendor. It's not until you look under the bonnet and get some specialist advice to understand, because then you go back to the bank and they say, yeah, we're not quite happy with the LVRs on that. So it's important that people who are entering into this space are really clear about what they're actually buying, and using someone like yourself to better understand if there are any nuances that you need to know. Can you give us a dummies guide to strata minutes, please, Amanda?
Ooh, strata minutes. Okay. Well, we have two different types of meetings that go with the two different entities that I was talking about earlier. You have your owners corporation that has the general meeting, and then your committee that has the committee meeting. And this is the same across the country, committee meetings and general meetings. So I always say that your minutes, somebody who knows nothing about the building, usually a purchaser is wanting to come in and understand what's going on, should be able to read the minutes and without having to read a novel, without having to know everybody's life story, without having to know that Mrs. Jones sneezed because Mr. Smith brought his cat into the room. We don't need all of that, guys. We just need to know what was put to the meeting for discussion and what was decided. Some buildings want to put in all of the discussion because they want to record why somebody was opposing their application to keep an animal or whatever that was. And it gets a little bit personal when we want to record everything. So I do caution against that. But somebody coming in to understand on a quick read, a couple of pages for a committee meeting is plenty, what the items for discussion were, what was decided, so that if then they want to dig deeper, so they say, lot 2, it was proposed that the ceiling be repaired because of the leak that happened in 2017. It was resolved that work be done. Lot 2 is the one that I'm buying. I need to ask some more questions about that. So the minutes should be able to tip you off to be able to go that little bit deeper.
It's a great little research tool, as you say, to work out what the history is. And sometimes it gives you some really great insights as to the reason why the current owner is actually selling. There may be a legitimate reason why they're selling, and there may be another reason where a future levy is coming, or there's a history of challenges that you can get some amazing insights from these minutes, can't you?
You can, and effectively, Bryce, what you're also saying is, just for clarity for everyone who's listening in the community, the strata minutes is what you can request as part of your due diligence as well. So I think we want to make that clear that while we're talking about this, is it sort of highlights what investigations you should be making for potentially further investigation, as Amanda just highlighted, in terms of, okay, that's of interest to me, as is things like sinking funds and so forth. So, it is an absolute essential piece of information you need to acquire when you're doing your due diligence on a property. So I think that's why we want to make sure that we understand what they are, because there'll be further questions there, won't there, Amanda?
Yes, it is so important. We're making the assumption here that people are doing these inspections or are aware that they can do these inspections and absolutely should do these inspections. So any owner in a strata scheme can authorize anybody else to go and inspect the books and records of the owners corporation. It is something that strata lawyers highly recommend be done, and be done by a professional strata searcher, or be done by a strata lawyer, be done by somebody who knows what they're looking for and knows what's not going to be there, or what's not there, what's missing from the records. Because so much is, I do a lot of this work for clients, not necessarily clients buying, but clients who may be in dispute with the owners corporation, go and look at the records. 9 times out of 10, I'm sitting down with the strata manager saying, where are the emails? Where are the minutes from this year? Where's the capital works fund forecast? It's just not there. And I still have clients come to me today, and they've bought a property, and then they say, we're a few years in. It's a brand new property, and Amanda, there's building defects, and I had no idea. And I say, well, did you? First of all, did you read the news? And second of all, did you, do an inspection of the records and see that there were these communications going on with the developer? Oh, no, we just loved it and we bought it.
Yeah. You mentioned capital works forecast. That's worth unpacking there. Can you help our community better understand how that's kind of a future fund trying to make sure the upkeep of the building. But what are your insights there?
Yeah, absolutely. So these buildings have these capital works funds or sinking funds, we used to call them in New South Wales, where you put, that's your rainy day money, put money aside to prepare for the future. And in a lot of ways, people like that. That's one of the benefits of strata. You know, some people say, oh, if you buy strata, you have to pay levies. Well, if you buy any property, you have to repair and maintain it. And the good thing about strata is you are legally obliged to plan for that, and everybody else is contributing to that. So you can be on the front foot there. We have to have these 10-year plans, have always had to have 10-year plans according to our legislation, where you have a specialist come in, look around the property and tell you this is what your funding should look like each year over the next 10 years. And your capital works fund for a building generally that's getting older should be increasing, because in 5 years' time, we're looking at replacing the lift. 10 years' time, we're looking at replacing the roof membrane. Nobody likes surprises. Nobody likes special levies. Nobody likes to have to take out a strata loan at 9% interest because we don't have money in the bank to do emergency work. So planning is really important, and it's good that our legislation mandates that planning in the form of a capital works fund plan.
And Amanda, you're a specialist in New South Wales, and obviously they're different in every state, but that 10-year planning, is that consistent in Victoria, Queensland and other states and territories?
Yep, it is. Yeah.
Perfect. So that's for everyone to remember.
Really important part of the process. Yeah.
Yep. Amanda, it's also important for people to understand too that there's a balancing act, isn't it? Right, because you want to be a good citizen within your community and say, yeah, let's plan for 10 years. But if you're only planning to be there for 2 years, you don't necessarily want to overcook that, because as soon as you sell those funds that you've contributed to that fund, it's not as if you knock on the door and say, hey, listen, do you know that stuff that I've paid in the past? I'm not going to use the next 8 years worth. Can I have my money back? It's actually it's actually part of it. And for us, when we're buying into these particular properties, we like to see the health of the body corporate fund as one of the markers is how much is in that sinking fund, as you say, or the capital works fund, because if it's skinny, that's not ideal. And if there's a lot in there, there's sometimes there's an opportunity, right? Because there's obviously they are planning really well for a rainy day.
Yeah, and you know what you're looking for, and you're an intelligent investor, and working with people who understand this stuff and the importance of knowing this stuff. Because I agree, if I'm looking at records, I'm looking at financials that look healthy, then the property to me is absolutely more valuable. But this attitude, and I see it all the time with owners who, and look, let's say this, it's often an older generation that they're in retirement, perhaps planning for the future and planning perhaps for the kids' future, and not being necessarily very liquid, but finding that their asset is their home. And we don't want to be constantly throwing cash into this asset, which we know in a few years' time is we're going to sell it, or it's going to go down to the kids and they can sort out those problems. And that attitude has become more common this year, I have to say. 2020, with COVID and all of the upside down, inside out we've gone through, I have seen a lot more committees with a particular demographic sitting back and holding on and just waiting until the last minute to spend any money. And I think we're going to continue to see the fallout from that for some years to come in this area.
Amanda, you make a really good point there. As you set up these controlling bodies, what is the rules around control? Like, in other words, the horror stories are that a developer develops a property and keeps a controlling interest in it in terms of how they've structured up the agreements. But in the vast majority of cases, they may be individual owners of that property, and then the sum of the parts make up the voting rights. Can you take us through where those voting rights live? Is it a majority rule for most agreements, or are there different types of terminology around certain events, like a 75% majority or whatever that looks like, that will get a motion passed?
Yeah, so another complex area of strata law, voting rights and voting entitlements at meetings. For the most part, yes, majority rules at a general meeting where all owners are coming together. Most matters are determined by a show of hands, and if it's a show of hands, it's one vote, one owner. Other more serious matters, so passing a bylaw or a rule. These are the rules that are registered on the title, and they can be as simple as a rule about whether you can hang washing on the line or not, or a rule about whether one the exclusive use of a common property parking space, so a really valuable right. You can grant these rights through bylaws or rules. We need to have a special resolution for that. So that's a higher threshold of approval. We often think of it as a 75% approval. It's actually expressed a little bit differently in the legislation, but a super majority. And that's calculated by way of unit entitlements. A special resolution is not on a show of hands. Each apartment, each lot has a particular unit entitlement, and I'm just thinking around the country, I think that's the terminology around the country, unit entitlements, and that tells you how much you contribute towards levies. So your unit entitlement may be 10 out of 100, so you're contributing 10% towards the levies, simple calculation, but it also gives you your voting rights on a special resolution. So if you have the penthouse apartment, for example, you're just one lot, but you may have a much higher unit entitlement, contributing more, but then having a greater say in the vote on a special resolution. So we then get into all sorts of fun and games when it comes to collecting proxy votes, because you want to push through a particular motion. So we see owners going around to all the penthouse owners collecting their proxy votes because their votes are more valuable, and working out how many people can hold how many proxies and how we can farm them out to different owners to make sure the vote gets through. All very technical.
Wow, there's a lot involved, right? Hey, what would you say to our community who's listening to this going, yeah, there's just no way I want to pay body corporate fees, because over my professional career, I've heard that a lot. I don't want that property. I don't want to pay any body corporate fees. Now, we'll put our colours on to the mast here. We're not big fans of medium to high density stock, but we are okay with lower density, old school type of strata living. So, but when someone says, yep, no body corporate fees, I kind of say to them, well, listen, to be honest, if you unpack what body corporate fees are, it's not to make a profit. It's usually break even after they've taken into account a bit of, as we talked about before, capital works. So it's really maintenance and items, work it out, the costs, and then divide it by the lot owners or the unit entitlement, as you talked about before, and then that's your bill. So it's just this nice, tidy way of having the expenses that you would have on a house, because you've got to cover the building insurance, you've got to cover the maintenance and all those sorts of things. It's a nice little tidy way to package it up. You would have come across that a fair bit. Are there any unique insights or something? I'm sure you've had that conversation a lot. How do you overcome that?
Well, look, I've got a good example for you of a client where there was concrete cancer in the building. So, look, I agree completely with your view there, Bryce, about the investment stock for Strata. We're looking at older buildings, absolutely. I'm the first one to put my hand up and say I'd never buy new. I used to say I'd never buy within 10 years, but we can look at Mascot Towers and say that's just gone out to 15 plus years that I wouldn't be buying. So I own and live at the moment in a 40-year-old building. And this particular building that I'm thinking of with the concrete cancer, many owners, it was the responsibility of the owners corporation to dig out the concrete out of all the balconies, and also for some apartments 1 meter into the apartment, to get rid of the concrete cancer, relay the floor. Huge project, $1 million project. But at that time, a number of owners decided that they would take the opportunity to renovate, and they always wanted the new kitchen. They always wanted the nice new floating timber floors. They wanted to paint, do all sorts of things. This is a great opportunity for them to get what's essentially a balcony, new balcony tiles at no cost to them. Right? Because that is a responsibility of the owners corporation to fix the concrete. In the process, they must retile. So they've got a nice new balcony, new tiling. They've got a nice new level floor, because the owners corporation's come in and dug up part of the floor. The owners corporation has to pay for the new flooring, at least to the point of leveling the floor. And then they've got contractors there. They're already potentially moved out because the work is being done, and they can take the opportunity to upgrade, lay their new floors, do their new kitchen. It's all being done as part of the package. I have seen brand new bathrooms done that way as well, because the owner's corporation has had to fix the waterproofing, which is common property. And the owner has said, well, I might as well upgrade the bathroom while I'm at it. So these are things where because you're in an owner's corporation, because you're contributing to the repair and maintenance of the property, when the time comes, you can really benefit from that repair and maintenance being done. You can tack on your own renovation to that. Less of a positive situation, perhaps, where there's a big storm and your ceiling caves in. You don't have to pay personally a cent to that. That's covered by the owner's corporation's insurance, or it is a repair and maintenance obligation of the owner's corporation. Brand new ceiling, you haven't had to fork out a surprise payment of 20 grand plus. You're covered. So I see a lot of benefits there. But we're dealing with human psychology here. We don't like it when Mrs. Jones down the hall gets her brand new ceiling, but it's nice to have that backup when we get the brand new ceiling.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, except for when it doesn't affect me.
That's it.
Well, that would be common, right? You've got 5 people. The one at the front has front access. The 4 at the back have common driveway access. Something happens on the common driveway. The person at the front goes, well, hang on, that doesn't affect me, so I don't want to contribute. So I'm sure there's a bunch of those, which I'd love to get your comment on. But also, as part of that, you talked about $1 million fix before. What is the process? Let's just go back to that 5 units, and let's just imagine an old 70s style 5 units, common driveway, single level, and unit number 2 has got structural issues that may need underpinning, but it's largely affecting unit 2 and unit 3, but unit 5 and unit 1 might not be affected. What's the remedy? What's the actual remedy for that? How do you get the owner's corporation attention to actually take it seriously? Because number 1 and number 5 probably have zero agenda or incentive to move that forward, and they're representative on the body corporate.
Oh, yeah. When I am asked, Amanda, what's the biggest complaint or the most common complaint that comes across your desk, I say it is a failure to repair and maintain the common property. And it's exactly the situation you're talking about, Bryce, where you have one particular owner who has the problem, whether it's the damp coming up from the floor or whether it's the leaking ceiling, and the rest of the building just says, don't want to know about it, don't want to do anything. Well, the Strata law says that an owner's corporation must repair and maintain its common property. That is a mandatory duty. It is strict. It is absolute. We have authority from cases from our highest courts saying that that is the case. No questions asked, no excuses. It doesn't matter if there's no money in the bank. It doesn't matter that this person didn't pay their levies. None of that is relevant. You have to repair and maintain the common property. If an owner is struggling to convince their owner's corporation that that's the case, and they come to somebody like me, I say to them, well, we can approach the tribunal, the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal here, or the Victorian equivalent, VCAT. We call NCAT. And seek an order that the owner's corporation, the strata scheme, meet their legal duty and repair and maintain. And when you're seeking those kinds of orders, you have to be very specific about what you want. So you'd have a report from an expert saying, this is the scope of work, this is how much it's going to cost. And you say, tribunal, can you please tell the owner's corporation they must do this? And there should never, ever be an argument about the obligation to do the work. Well, if there's an argument, it generally comes down to how the work should be done. So the building might say, oh no, it's not $100 grand job, it's a 10 grand job. Here's my guy. He says, do it this way. And then we have what I call the battle of the experts, and they fight out and tribunal decides.
So who gets to decide on the engineer, right? Because clearly you'd need to know what the scope of works is, what it will take to rectify, and how much it will cost. But as you say, there's a spectrum of specialists. Who gets to decide who the specialist is?
Yeah, so if you have a cooperative building and they've agreed that, yes, we have to fix this and we have to meet our legal duty, because it is repair and maintenance work, you don't actually have to go to a general meeting. So you don't have to put it to all the owners for their decision. The committee can make that decision. They can decide who they engage. They can decide how much they spend. They can decide how the work is to be done. This often comes as a surprise to a lot of people, how much power a committee or a council of owners actually has to to spend money and to make decisions about contractors. It's a huge amount of power. The only time they may have to go to a general meeting is if they don't have the money in the bank to pay for it. So if you're going to raise money through levies, you have to do that at a general meeting. And that's when you really start the political process. If you really want this particular engineer or contractor, you have to campaign, you have to convince owners that this is the right person. And yes, it's worth spending a little bit more so that we get the job done properly and don't have problems down the track.
Amanda, you talk importantly about the absolute obligation from the highest courts in the land that work must be attended to. What is the risk to those committee members who don't comply with that obligation? Like, are they legally liable in the event that they are negligent in their duties that they are performing for the owners corporation?
Yeah, so there are a lot of legal protections in our legislation for committee members and for council members, because if there wasn't, then
No
people
one would go on them.
they just wouldn't put their hands up. They wouldn't go out there and say, "I'm a volunteer. I don't need this," right? So there are a lot of protections there, and as long as a committee is acting what we call in good faith, and people say to me, "What does that mean, Amanda?" I say, "Well, they are doing what their strata manager is recommending. They are doing what their lawyer is recommending if there's a lawyer involved." It is very rare, and I can't think in my experience of a real detailed published case on this. There's a few comments in the cases about negligent committee members, but we don't have anything huge where negligence has been pinned on a committee member. It's very hard. They would have to have evidence that a lawyer said do it or don't do it, and the committee member said stuff you, I'm doing it my way. As long as they're acting in good faith, then any liability attaches to the owners corporation. It doesn't attach to the individual, which is fair enough.
So if they're not acting in good faith and they are intentionally stalling or doing that, and they're very difficult because, as we just had an example before, it doesn't affect them, it affects owner in unit number 4 and not them, and they know it's an expensive claim. How do you just got to go through the process? You just got to be firm.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, sadly, yes, you do have to go through the tribunal process. And our tribunal is set up, and tribunals across the country are set up to be as consumer friendly as possible. So the tribunal will tell you that you don't need a lawyer and should be able to run the case from start to finish without us. And sometimes we're not even allowed. In New South Wales, we have to seek permission to be before the tribunal. Look, the reality is, and I work with clients from all spectrums. You know, I have my legal practice clients who pay my hourly rate, and we spend quite a lot of money before the tribunal to get a result. And then I have clients inside my online membership who can't afford those rates but are getting that as much guidance as they can, and they struggle. They really do struggle to go through this process alone. So I think it's a little bit trite perhaps for our tribunals to say we're consumer friendly and you can do all of this without a lawyer. You can absolutely try. And so sometimes, best case scenario, you start and the building accepts that they have this obligation, they have this legal duty, and they come to the table. Sometimes just filing that first application for mediation is enough to send the message, hey, I know my rights and you have to do this work, and I'm going to continue to pursue this unless you come to the table. And that's an excellent result when that happens.
You mentioned before strata loans. Can we unpack that a little bit? Because if something that you said $1 million fix before in one of your anecdotes, but what if it's like $100,000 or something that needs to be done and it's just out of the stretch for owners? How do they get the loan? How do the banks assess it? And what sort of rates are we talking about for those things?
Yep. So we do have specialist strata loan providers who operate across the country. Only a couple of banks, as I understand it, are providing these kinds of loans. They are a unique financial product because they are unsecured. There's no mortgage, nothing is registered on the title. The owner's corporation is the legal entity borrowing the money under that loan. It's not individual owners, so you don't have anything on your title. You don't have to tell your mortgagee. However, for that reason, the interest rates are very high. I mentioned earlier 8 or 9%. That's been the case from my memory for a number of years, that those rates haven't changed with our other normal rates. So, and you can borrow anything, you know, from 50 grand to $1 million. There is no real assessment criteria. Maybe the lender will have a look at what it is that you want to do with the money. Is this a capital works project? Are we upgrading here? Are we having to pay legal fees? You can borrow money if you have to pay a lawyer. So there's a loan contract that has to get approved at a general meeting, or at least should be, is always my recommendation, approved at a general meeting. And then the loan repayments, principal and interest, are made from the common fund. And it may be that your levies have increased slightly to be able to fund those loan repayments, or there's a special levy each year that funds the annual loan repayment, and you pay it off over time. I do see buildings after 5 to 10 years kind of get sick of having the loan on the books. It's not a great look if you want to sell and people are saying, what is this big debt? And they just raise a special levy and pay it out when they have owners who can facilitate that.
So Amanda, you're sort of talking about events that are quite expensive. So I've got a two-part question here. The first one is, what's roughly the term of those loans? Do they have normally a 10-year term, 5-year term, or do they extend out, or is there no norm? It's just sort of what's negotiated.
My understanding, it can be anything from a year to 20 years. They can be quite long-term loans.
Yep. Fantastic. And so I wanted to then ask you, you mentioned concrete cancer before. Some of our community may not have even heard of what that actually is, but it's the steel inside the concrete that is rusting, which is breaking the concrete apart, and that structurally defects the property. But so that's one that Bryce and I have come across, and our industry experts have always come across in terms of risk. What are some of the most common, most expensive issues that you would see these type of special levies being raised? You know, can you summarise your top 5?
Yeah, sure. Roof membranes are a really big deal. When the roof membrane fails and we have water,
Yes.
water is the thing. And I mean, even concrete cancer is because of water ultimately, because we've had these buildings that are constructed and the insulation between the floors that's being used is a product called magnesite. When magnesite gets wet, it leaches chlorides into the concrete, and that's what causes the Rio to rust, as you're saying, Ben. So water is such an insidious thing in our strata buildings, and we heard a lot about that the last 12 months with all these building defects coming to light. Roof membranes, big job to replace those, very expensive. Building defects generally, so new builds where the developer builder has disappeared, become insolvent, and there's no insurance, no homeowner's warranty insurance, because there doesn't have to be for a multi-story property. That's the state of our law. Owners then having to dip into their own pockets to pay for rectification works. So that's a huge expense as well. We're seeing at the moment buildings having to deal with cladding, so having to remove and replace facades because of defective cladding and having to fund that. There are some government programs around that are assisting with that, but not everywhere. And look, I'm going to say it, legal fees, litigation.
Yes.
Litigation. So big bills get sent there for buildings involved in litigation. If a building is a defendant to litigation, so an owner has brought an action against a building for some reason, it's quite possible that there is a policy of insurance that would cover the building. Most buildings have legal defense insurance policies and coverage. And I say that because a lot of buildings forget that they have that, and strata managers forget to check that legal fees may be covered under a policy. But the policy limits, the usual limits I see are about 50 grand. Look, if you're in the Supreme Court, even the tribunal appeal panel, you're spending more money than that.
Hey, can you tell us? There's some really good tips there and things to look out for. Can you tell us what you've talked before? I've seen you talk about the unlimited liability of strata property owners. Can you give us some insights there, please?
Yeah, sure. So an owner's corporation is not like a company, not like a normal company. As much as I used the analogy earlier on, owners' corporations are expressly excluded from the corporations law. And we don't have this concept of limited liability that you do in a private company, where you're only exposed to the extent that you've put in to the company. So to the value of your shareholding, let's say. A lot of people buy into strata thinking that, oh, well, my unit entitlement is 10 out of 100, so I'm only liable for 10% of the debts of the owner's corporation. Or my unit is valued at $1 million, and if all goes wrong, then I just sell my unit and that would be all that any creditor could recover. Not the case. Owners' corporations are unlimited liability corporations. That means that every owner is exposed to the extent of their assets. Okay, not their asset, not the unit, to the extent of their personal assets. So if we think about investors who own 4 different apartments, something goes wrong in the building, you're exposed to the value of all of your assets. You have different apartments in other buildings. Apartments that are owned in super funds. Okay, that's a very wealthy owner there with significant assets exposed. The reason that they are unlimited liability corporations is so that we can raise money through levies. You have to be able to have a meeting, strike levies, and for everybody to contribute to that levy in accordance with their unit entitlement. Now, this is never really a problem. We haven't had cases about this where people have been sent bankrupt, or some of this happens in the US, but it hasn't happened here. Where I started talking about this and where people started thinking about this was when we saw what happened with Mascot Towers. And we started to see that a building that has potentially up to I think they're up to about a $50 million bill potentially, once they pay for the fix and pay the interest on the strata loan, then this is a massive bill. And this is not a situation where people who can't pay that bill, can't contribute, will just be able to sell, because their apartments are only worth what someone will pay for them, and no one wants to buy one of those apartments right
and
now.
that's that classic joint and several liability risk that we're talking about here. So yeah, it's obviously fascinating for everyone. So I was glad, Amanda, that you did say, you know, are there a lot of examples of that happening? So for everyone who's driving along thinking, oh my God, I'm a strata unit holder right now in their car, going, be mindful that they are extreme events when those rights might be exercised. Is that fair to say?
It is. And when people can't afford to pay the levies, or disaster strikes, they sell. They sell their apartment. Somebody else comes in. Maybe it's a sale that only covers the mortgage, but at least there's been someone there to come step in, and the levies then run with the land, right? So they're paid out, or the new owner's going to have to take on that responsibility. Where it becomes that sick feeling in the stomach is, what if nobody wants to buy my apartment? What if I can't find a purchaser? What if I don't have enough to pay out the mortgage? Then the owner's corporation, they're not a secured creditor. They're down the line. You know, they want their levies paid. And this concept of others having to then pick up the bill, it's that liability then gets shared across to the other owners at a higher proportion. So that's how you could be left having to pay more.
And it's important note for our community, Ben, because all along we've been consistent about medium and high density. And whenever we do recommend someone buys into a strata scenario, it's very boutique. It's small in number. It's because there's land component. Sometimes it's 1 of 4, 1 to 5, maybe even 1 of 20 if they're buying an old school flat style apartment. But we're never really encouraging, well, not never, ever really, we don't encourage any of our community, our clients, to be buying medium and high density. But I thought it's often not spoken about. Amanda, I think you were the pioneer in this part of the discussion, and I thought it was really important that for what we're trying to do in our community is inform everyone, so it better helps people understand what they're being exposed to in these communities. Hey, can you tell us a little bit about do you know the person who has a ground floor, call it a courtyard, but they don't own the courtyard, it's exclusive use, so therefore the question when they're talking, is that yours, or is that the boy? In some cases you can actually get agreement, so to make that come on title. Can you talk to us about different ways that for beneficial ownership for people who do find themselves in these scenarios where some of the body corporates might agree to that?
Yeah, so this comes up, you would see it, I'm sure, regularly when you're buying for clients, and you have the real estate agent who says there's this lovely courtyard, and you have that's yours, and then you might look at the contract and you look at the plan and say, well, hang on, this is not on title, it's not shown as part of the lot on the plan, but there is this bylaw. So another way that you can get use of common property, or use of property that's not within your lot, is by way of a registered bylaw, which gives you not the ownership of the property, but the right to use it. And I mentioned earlier about bylaws being made at a general meeting by special resolution. They're registered on the title. They are valuable rights, and it's important to understand that it's a right to use. It is not ownership. So not as valuable as actually having that land in your own ownership. And it is a right because it's under a bylaw that can be taken away. Now, we can't change these bylaws without getting the consent of the owner who has the benefit, but the owner who has the benefit cannot unreasonably refuse their consent. So I've had such bylaws overturned by saying the owner is unreasonably refusing to consent, and they're unreasonable because they're not paying anything for this space. They should pay something for this space. The bylaw was done 20 years ago. It's a hugely valuable space. The case I'm thinking of, it was a rooftop and they had gorgeous views and they built up into it and it was wonderful. Hadn't paid a cent for it. And the tribunal agreed with me and said, yes, it's unreasonable for this bylaw to be in place. We're going to repeal it. So they were forced to repeal it and they lost that right. Now, yes, you can subdivide the common property. So what you do is subdivide the common property and then purchase it from the owner's corporation, and it becomes part of your lot, or it's a separate lot that you then own. That is the more secure and the more valuable right. So there's definitely a process for that, again, involving the local council to make sure that it's consistent with all their planning requirements, getting a specialist strata lawyer involved in that process, having contracts drawn up, getting the area valued. Your unit entitlement will change so that you're contributing more because of the benefit that you've got. But it's all definitely doable and recommended, I'd say, over a bylaw.
And Amanda, as part of that process, I mean, that's a good example, right, where you are talking about a rooftop area and the air in that rooftop space. What happens to those funds once it is valued and the potential owner agrees to buy that space above them? Does that go into the Capital Works Fund, or can there be an agreement through the owners corporation that each of the owners would get a percentage share of that based on their unit holdings or their
Yeah.
Yep. So there's options there.
There are options. Yep. It can go into the Capital Works Fund and be a nice little bonus for a project that's coming up. Or it can, if you have unanimous agreement, it can be paid out to the owners individually. One thing to bear in mind there is make sure that you get tax advice on that kind of a setup. So definitely any sale of common property, any unusual income that's coming in and that owners are wanting to get their hands on, get the right advice on what the best tax position is for you.
Hey, just on a related one, what are the do's and don'ts around renovating? So let's just say an apartment, for example. What have you seen as the do's and don'ts for doing that?
Do definitely understand whether or not you need permission. So don't just start ripping out the bathroom or knocking out the walls or renovating the kitchen. And I say may or may not because this is a complex area of the law. Depending on what you're doing and where you are, you may be able to do cosmetic work without approval. You may just need the approval of the committee, or you may need to go to a general meeting and get a bylaw. So lots of different standards of approval. So know what you don't know and ask questions about that first. I've been involved in a case recently where a commercial owner did a $500,000 fit out, major, installing new bathrooms and plumbing systems on the understanding that there was a bylaw in place that allowed them to do the work. Now they have spent considerable amounts of money on legal fees having a fight about what that bylaw means and whether the bylaw did allow them to do the work or not. And they have recently been told by the tribunal appeal panel that the bylaw did not allow them to do that work and they must reinstate.
Oh gosh. Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Ouch.
Very
Right.
ouch.
So there's a clear do
that's
then.
worst case scenario, yeah. Yes, so definitely know what approvals you need and get those approvals, and be aware that you might have to wait. I said earlier that general meetings could take months sometimes, and the building doesn't have to convene a meeting just because you ask them to. It's a matter for the committee to decide when they're going to call a meeting. There are different ways that you might be able to get support from other owners to requisition a meeting, but you don't necessarily want to have to go down that path. And if you're thinking you're going to flip a property quickly, renovate it, make some money, that might not be the case in Strata.
Now, Amanda, we've had lots of Rental Act reform going on around the nation. That is also including more pet-friendly approaches that we're seeing in terms of the requirements of allowing or not allowing pets into a property. Are there any exemptions or any special clauses? I know in certainly a couple of the old company title properties that I've seen in downtown Sydney that I've looked at in the past had pet clauses around them. Does this new reform change those clauses, or have you seen any of those pet clauses still in place where buildings don't allow pets?
Yes, this has been a really hot topic in New South Wales for a few years now, because what we call blanket pet bans, so buildings that have bylaws that say no pets allowed, full stop, end of story, those bans have been challenged through our tribunal by a few cases that started a couple of years ago. And it's been a bit of a roller coaster here, because at first the tribunal said blanket pet bans are invalid because they are harsh, unconscionable or oppressive, and we can't have those kind of bylaws in New South Wales. Then the appeal panel said no, they're fine. And then at the time we're recording this, just last month, the Court of Appeal, the highest court in New South Wales, said blanket pet bans are invalid. They're harsh, unconscionable or oppressive. Now, this has been the case in Queensland for quite some time. The Queensland law is quite well settled. They can't have unreasonable bylaws, and bylaws that ban pets have been found to be unreasonable. So we're a little bit behind in New South Wales. But definitely, I've been doing a lot of podcasting, talking, educating about this topic the last few weeks, because all buildings are asking now, oh, is our blanket pet ban invalid? Those bylaws, you're right, are still there. They're still around. If schemes want to go and enforce their pet bans, I say good luck to you. You're ultimately going to end up before the tribunal, and the tribunal in New South Wales is going to say we are bound by the Court of Appeal's decision, and that decision has not been appealed. Bound by the Court of Appeal's decision, and a blanket pet ban is harsh, unconscionable or oppressive. Now, you've mentioned also there renting. I want to be very clear here. There's a difference between a building banning the keeping of pets in the building as part of the bylaws, which we're saying in New South Wales you're not allowed to do, and an owner who decides whether or not their tenant can have a pet in their apartment. Now, in New South Wales, I think it might be different in Victoria, but in New South Wales, a landlord can still say, I don't want any pets in my property. And that's their property. They're, from my point of view, entitled to decide what goes on in it. Different to the owner's corporation saying, we don't care whether you're a landlord, whether you're a tenant, whether you're an owner-occupier, you just can't have any pets. We don't like it. So I just want to clarify that.
No, I think it's a good clarification, because unfortunately in Victoria, yes, we, as the owner of the property, we don't have that right to automatically dismiss the pets. We've got to go through a process to argue that that pet may be inappropriate for the property, as opposed to a blanket ban, as we've talked about.
Hey, Amanda, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. You're clearly at the top of your game, and you understand this this strata environment very, very well. So first of all, thank you for coming on and sharing that. And to be honest, I could keep chatting for a little while. I'm just conscious of your the final
Pleasure.
one.
I could keep talking about this all day too. Don't worry.
I'll maybe circle back another time, I reckon. But my final question for you is. We've talked about, obviously we've talked about the pain points here, right? Because, clearly you as a lawyer don't get called in for everyone just to say, come over for a barbecue, let me tell you how great the community is. But I wonder if, what sort of observations you can offer on this around what is it about strata communities that do set them apart when they do work harmoniously and things work well and they have a utopian approach to living communally with each other, because it's not going away. As I started this chat, quarter-acre block with a house surrounded by a garden, a hills hoist and a barbecue, that is just not the reality of future people given the densities that are coming in our city. So what does good strata community living look like?
Oh, I am so glad you asked that, Bryce, and it's an excellent place for us to end. I've already said I live in Strata, okay? Yeah, I get some weird looks from my colleagues and strata managers who say, "Are you serious, Amanda? What do you knock off work to go lay bricks? What is going on?" But I do feel very lucky that I am part of one of these communities that you're talking about. And you might say, "Well, I know how to pick them." Yes, there's that, and that's what we've talked the last hour about, trying to arm people with that same knowledge. It's a community where people respect each other. Number one. Understand the good work that a few do. And it is always going to be only a few. You are always going to have people who don't get involved, don't want to get involved. And in my view, don't need to get involved. That's not how functioning communities work. There's always going to be that inner circle. But the trick is to be able to protect that inner circle, respect and protect them so that they keep doing the good work that they're doing. I have an ebook. The cover says the number one thing that ensures peaceful apartment living. And the spoiler, the answer is a functioning strata committee. The committee is so important. I would add to that a professional strata manager, a very good strata manager, who you might have to pay a little bit more than the other guy who was happy to do the work, just the retired real estate agent, doesn't know much about strata, but he's cheap. No, go for the specialist who has a good reputation, who's been dealing with complex buildings with difficult problems, who'll be able to hold your hand through those difficult times. I think if you've got those two things, you've got people who look out for each other, people who there's regular meetings, good communication, then you're in a good spot to have a good functioning community.
Very
Well
good.
said. Beautiful
Great
advice.
insights.
Great advice.
That was terrific. So as I said, it's been a real treat and a pleasure, and I appreciate you coming on. I know that you have a podcast called Your Strata Manager, right? You obviously
Your
have
Strata Property?
Your Strata Property, my bad. I have listened to them, so I just misquoted. And you've obviously got a business for people. So we're going to put some details in the show notes so that people who have been listening to that, who can relate to you and your story and how you approach it, so that they can definitely reach out to you. But what's the best way that they can contact you, Amanda?
Perfect. Yes. So the podcast is Your Strata Property. You can Google that or Google Amanda Farmer Strata Lawyer. You'll absolutely find me. There's so much going on in our space at the moment, particularly with COVID and all the craziness that's thrown up for apartment living, but also with bylaws and pets. I'm running a Strata boot camp on the 19th of November. And stratabootcamp.com is the way to find out about that. If you're listening to this after that date, that URL, definitely, if you go there, you will certainly find more ways to find out more about what I do and join in.
Boot camp sounds interesting. They have to sort of get the gear on and smear the black stuff across the face and all that sort of stuff. But clearly,
That's an idea. Let's throw that in.
clearly you know your stuff. So if anyone's interested in that, they should check out that link for sure. But again, thanks for coming on and educating our community, Amanda. And I think your insights have been awesome. And we'll look forward to maybe catching up with you further on down the track.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bryce. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, mate, if you didn't know anything about Strata, Stratum, company title properties, owners corporations, body corporations, you have now got yourself some knowledge.
That was the cliff notes right there, Ben.
Concrete cancer, all things pets. We went through it all, like in terms of laws, and it was great. Amanda was fantastic. A lot of knowledge there, and a really, really nice 101 on what is strata and body corporate.
Clearly someone who knows her subject very well, but I always think that there's a fine line between being an expert and being able to explain it in a way that's simple for people to understand. And I always think it's a sign of how well you know your topic by how simply you can explain it. So Amanda has got vast experience, knows her stuff really, really well, but made it so super straightforward and simple for everyone to understand. So you set that up beautifully, Ben. If you didn't know anything about strata before today, I just said it before, you got the cliff notes, you got the cheat notes, you are now up to speed on probably, we talked about one interview, but you're probably at 201 level as a result of that. So
True.
Which was great. So thank you again, Amanda. We appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and your insights with our community, which we know will be of huge value to them. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, it's actually a continuation of my mindset minute, right? So, in terms of let the other person do a great deal of the talking was what that was about. I have this, I kind of have this principle that, and I don't know where I picked it up. I'd love to acknowledge the source, but I've had it for a number of years that and it might be something that I've done to game or hack myself, the fact that I'm an introvert, but I have this saying that I already know what I know. I actually want to know what you know. And it serves me well when I'm in a conversation with someone, or, if we talk about what Dale Carnegie says about the need for importance by speaking at what you know. I can honestly say, and there's probably cases where I don't do this all the time, but I can honestly say most of the time I take the view that, take Amanda, for example, clearly an expert in her space. And I've been buying properties for over 20 years now, and I've been buying properties that are strata for some time, and I'm obviously have a little bit of knowledge in that regard. But I already know what I know. I want to know what she knows. And clearly from the last sort of 45, 50 minutes, there was a lot to take on board. There were some wonderful insights that she gave. So my life hack today is essentially an affirmation or a principle to say, if it resonates with you, you could say when you're talking to someone to help you with that mindset minute today, just to remind yourself, I already know what I know. I want to know what you know. And I remember when I was chatting, whether that's Amanda today, Jamin, Nerida, whoever comes onto our podcast, I'm deeply intrigued by what they know because I want to know it myself. And I remember when I was traveling with the TV show, it was actually location. We were sitting around. And I probably prided myself on this comment, but we were chatting with the camera. I said, he was asking me, Chris, so that's enough about me. I want to find out more about you. And he just looked at me, stopped, paused, and he goes, Bryce, I have been around a lot of television presenters in my time, and never, ever have I heard a television presenter say, that's enough about me. Let's start talking about you, because they generally want to make it about them. And again, it's just that principle. I already know what I know. I actually want to know what you know. So there you go, folks. If that is able to help you go about your life, I would be excited by that, because it works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Hey Ben, what's making property news?
Well, Bryce, obviously we had the RBA come out with their announcement and the cash rate changes, and you can obviously get that information from one of the other podcasts where we did the RBA update and economic update. I mean, what was interesting was our question, which was, what's next? What are the banks going to do? Well, they've come out and told us they're going to do nothing with standard variable rates, unfortunately. They probably had an opportunity there to win over the customer, but what they're going to be doing is focusing on the fixed rates. So we've seen them come out and adjust their fixed rates down, and also probably a good news story for the business community. That they've definitely reduced their business lending rates, which is going to be good for the economy. So the big guys have basically done nothing, as I said, to those variable rates and focusing on fixed. So the question is, should you be looking at fixing for a period of time? Well, that's going to then come down to where rates go from here. I mean, it's very difficult to see them going any lower than they are. So maybe a hedge of some medium-term interest rates might be something if your budget requires you to be in a position where you want to have confidence around your out-of-pocket expenses, including the mortgage. So that could be a consideration to talk to your investment-savvy mortgage broker about maybe hedging that into some fixed portion of the loan. Just always remember, we do need a variable portion when we run our offset strategy. So make sure you have enough space for any surplus income that's coming into that for the period that you might set your fixed period for. So you don't have to do it exclusively fixed. It's just also about just making sure of that. So that was obviously the big news in terms of the further monetary policy and fiscal policy now rolled out. And now we sort of really just wait and see what happens as we roll into the new year with vaccines and hopefully some good news on that front, and also hopefully some good news on the jobs front, where we see, the sort of March period for JobKeeper and some changes potentially to JobSeeker. So that's really what's happening economically wise. One more month to go before Chrissy, and then we have a break in January before we get back into it. But certainly the big news, Bryce, was the movement in property prices more generally. So we made an early prediction, which was, a lot of people were sort of very cautious of, that we thought by the end of the year that property prices would go higher. And the reality is, they did. But we thought it was going to be by Christmas, and it's come a little bit earlier than that. So we did see the overall property prices increase across Australia for the month of October. So that's a positive, with Melbourne the only negative month in the capital cities. So I just wanted to spend a quick second in terms of just looking at some of the auction clearance rates and looking at some of the sub-markets, because we normally talk about, we hate to generalise because there is so many markets within markets. So I'll just give a bit of a snapshot in terms of what's happening in a couple of the larger markets around where clearance rates are. So city and inner south of Sydney had 129 auctions on Saturday with a preliminary clearance rate of 75%. Inner southwest had 88 auctions for a preliminary clearance rate of 84. Inner west had 69 with a clearance rate of 89. So that is a very hot market. North Sydney and Hornsby had a clearance rate on 118 auctions of 85.7. So that is big. Northern Beaches, 90% clearance rate on 72 auctions. So they are material enough to say that there is a lot of activity there. Ryde, 81.6% clearance rate on 49 auctions. Now, those preliminary rates will come down a little bit. Southwest was 84 on 30 auctions, and the Sutherland Shire was 56.5 on 53 auctions. So just giving you a bit of an idea in terms of those broader markets. Now, what was interesting about Melbourne, considering we're only just reopened, Bryce, but we've definitely seen some good stock numbers come through. Inner Melbourne, 174 auctions at a 75% clearance rate. So we've already reported 156 of those 174. So that might come down a little bit, but still on a good size number. That's anything above sort of 70 is seeing a moving market, right? That's a growing market. Inner East, 76% on 53 auctions. Inner South, 81 on 79 auctions. Northeast, 81 on 70 auctions. Northwest of Melbourne, 67 on 54 auctions. And then we've got Outer East, 76. So that's a good number as well, 49 auctions. And I'll round it out with Southeast at 75% on 57 and Inner West at 71 on 65. So it gives you a bit of an idea in terms of what's happening in our auction markets. There's the numbers in Queensland and the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast just aren't material enough to get a good read on. So whereas those numbers in those particular local government areas and sort of zones are telling us that, there's still a lot of demand and certainly pent up supply. So that's why we're seeing potentially property prices grow, Bryce.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing it on the ground at the coalface too, Ben, across multiple markets. So the data actually backs up what's going on at the coalface as well. So, mate, thank you for that. What's making property news? So clearly, we covered a lot of ground in today's episode.
Big episode. Big episode.
Huge, and I'm certainly excited to see that might add some value to our community who are trying to better understand this growing trend of living across our great country as we move into the next decade through the roaring 20s, Ben, and into the 30s as well. But until next week, mate.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Very well said, mate. See you next week, folks.
Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.